So we have a realistic TRC 458. If you watch the video previous to this one, that was on the relay that was bad. So that's been replaced. Here's the one that was in there when you watched the video. Has a new one in there now. I wanted to go over a few other things with this radio. Because, yeah, this has been one of those hair pulling out type radios. It's had some problems. Now, the customer knew he bought this used on eBay. He knew it had a problem for starters because there was a transistor bouncing around inside the radio. This one right here. As you can see, it's missing one leg, and the other ones aren't exactly the same length, and they're all brown and crunchy. Yeah, it had corroded off. It looks like at some point in its life it had soda, coffee, I don't know. Something was spilled in through the top cover in this back corner over here. So you can see down in there, actually you probably can't without a little bit of extra light. You can see how corroded it is and rusty. It actually continues the whole way along the back side all over here. But so this was the transistor that was corroded off right here. It was replaced. I recapped the radio. Had the absolutely horrible receive problem that would come and go, and traced that down to the bad relay. So that was replaced. But I was still having all kinds of transmit problems. And actually, it would transmit fine, at least I thought, with it just, after I got done the cap job, hook up a mic, hook it up to the dummy load, talk into the mic, everything seemed fine looking at the watt meter. So I went ahead and did the alignment, got the receiver portion done, and when it got to the transmit portion, I actually want to do the adjustments for it. So I'm looking at it on the spectrum analyzer, on an oscilloscope, watt meter, and I also need to adjust the bias for the driver and final transistors. And pretty much every stage there I ran into problems. So for starters, I found another bad transistor. There was another one back here, and that would be, reach over here and grab it. There was another one, lead corroded off. If it ever decides to focus, hocus pocus focus. Come on, camera. Yeah. And you can see that one was all brown on that one lead, and that one was actually corroded off too. But, like I said, I was having problems with sideband modulation. Actually, it was a weird sideband modulation problem. I'd inject a two-tone signal into it at the specified level, and it looked fine on the scope. But I'll be damned if when I talked into the microphone, it looked like absolute shit. I'd have a flat line with a few little lumps here and there of, the transmitted signal going out. But I'd do a two-tone signal injected into it at the proper level. Looked perfect. I tried to adjust the bias. The driver bias, no problem. Stuck the, and to adjust these, to measure it, you disconnect this wire here, install an amp meter in line with that, and then you adjust the pot that's right off of the bias transistor to adjust the bias current. And same thing for the final. Pull the other wire off, insert a amp meter in series, and adjust the pot that's right beside it. And I did the driver, it was fine. Went to do the final, 0. What the hell? Well, occasionally it'll happen. If the bias, there's a problem in it, if it's drawing too much current especially, I'll blow the fuse in my meter. It has a 2 amp fuse, it has 2 inputs, it has a 2 amp, and the meter that I usually use for this has a 2 amp and a 20 amp input. And I usually use the 2 amp input because that one has ranges that go all the way down to 200 microamps. So, so it's very accurate at lower levels, and usually you're only adjusting bias. Most radios, it's going to be somewhere between 10 to 50 milliamps, so very low current. So in any case, so I checked the meter, nothing wrong with the meter. And sure enough, there's absolutely, try anything else yet. Just absolutely would get at this wire right here, so same thing as the driver, pull the lead off, absolutely 0 bias current, none whatsoever. I get to doing some troubleshooting, potentiometer's bad, or that little trimmer resistor was bad. And my other problems with like I said, I just couldn't quite get the AMC adjusted properly, and sideband just looked absolutely horrible. Well, I get to checking, and of course that was back here where that leak was. Now that was another 2 trimmers that got replaced, so I've got a total of 3 of them that were replaced. But you can see this one, it's actually looks like rust. Again, if we can get the camera to focus, hocus pocus focus. You can see right there, it's all brown and crunchy. Yeah, these trimmers had seen better days, especially those 2 back there. But this one down here, I think that, no, that wasn't that one. It's actually the best looking of the 3 here. Yeah, that was this one, the 301, 300 ohm. That one right there. It actually looks fine. It's open, which was the problem. I stuck new trimmers in there. You can actually see these are more modern looking, and these are good high quality ones. I don't use, that's one thing, I don't reuse these cheap ones when I put new ones back in. If I'm going to replace them, I use the good high quality ones. They're still available. I buy these from, God, where in the hell do I get them? DigiKey. I had to think about that for a second. I get those from DigiKey. They pretty much have all of them. So, you know, that one was replaced. You can see one's green. There's a blue one right there, and then this is another one. But this was an oddball value. This series doesn't come in, but it's still a good high-quality replacement. But replaced all 3 of those. Bam. Came right in. Absolutely no problem. Adjusted the bias. Bam. 16 milliamps. Just the mic gain and the AMC. Everything looked perfect. So, yeah, anytime you're working on one of these and you run into weird problems, especially if you know you've had some type of moisture infiltration into a unit, and this one was obvious by the leads corroded off, some of the components back here. Check the trimmers, because you have to remember this is a mechanical attachment. The actual construction of these trimmer resistors, components, the lead can have corrosion on it, just like this big resistor right here. Let's say if this was corroded, it'll work fine up until the point that the actual wire has corroded completely in half and it's broken in half. But up until that point, it'll work fine, because it's not a mechanical. That's actually solid, solid metal. These rely on mechanical attachment of this resistive material pad on the underside here, and these legs that are crimped on. And if anything happens in that section right there where these metal legs are crimped onto this resistance material, it won't work. Or you can have the resistance can go drastically high on it. So you might have, like, in a case of like this 300 ohm one down here for the bias pots, they could read into the thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands, even mega ohms, But yeah, so just be aware of that. Trimmer resistors, and this isn't the only time I've had to replace trimmer resistors before. I have a very large selection of them because they are actually fairly common. The other problem with these is, especially these cheap ones, you'll be adjusting them, and I'll actually bust this one apart. There's not a lot. Of course, this one's actually going to be a fairly good one as far as construction goes. Okay, get her apart there. But what these actually have, if you can see that, I've pulled the wiper off of it now, so that's laying in my hand there, okay? And then you have the resistive material in between these 2 legs right here, and then in the center, you have that center part that's on top. That has the actual little wiper contact that comes down and touches the resistive material. And then that attaches on the underside here. This bottom part actually comes up through, and it has 2 little ears. It's, depending on how cheap the trimmer pots are, these little ears break off really easily. I don't know how many times over the years I've gone to adjust one, turned it, and boink, and that's exactly what it looks like. It'll fall apart like that. Sometimes this bottom part will fall out, but yeah, they just self-destruct. So just be aware these do go bad, and if you have a radio that's been stored in a damp basement or something like that, and you're having weird problems in a circuit, you can't trace it down to a bad cap or a resistor's gone bad, check the variable resistors, because these things, like I say, they have mechanical attachment between the resistive material and the actual contact legs, and if moisture's gotten in there and any corrosions happened, the resistance can skyrocket, and that can completely throw off how well it actually works, or doesn't work at all. So just another one of those little things to keep an eye out for. And speaking of moisture, I know the last several years we've just had, God, it's been actually probably a decade or more now. We just seem to be getting worse and worse and worse storms and hurricane seasons. And in my area, I'm right on the Pennsylvania-Maryland border. In my lifetime, I've seen climate change. I know there's lots of deniers out there, but it's happened. I've seen just in my lifetime. I just turned 45 recently, and I've seen changes in the environment. In my area, I'd see insects I've never seen before. The seasons have changed. Growing just in the garden, just planting and harvesting times have changed from when I was a little kid to now. But with all this bad weather we've been having and all these hurricanes, something you really have to keep an eye out for, especially on places like eBay: flood radios, and not just radios, anything electronic that's been in a flood. I've had a few radios like that were sent to me. People bought them, didn't know. It arrived, I took the top cover off, and if it was on a coastline, I've literally seen radios where when you pop the top cover off, the board was just white. And it wasn't corrosion, well, at least not yet. It was salt. Because being along the coastline, they had had either dikes burst or something, but seawater ingress into the radio, and when it dried out, all that salt residue was left over. I've pulled radios apart that oily type residue. It was probably in a flood, and yes, when you're in a flood, there's anytime new vehicles and fuel oil tanks, and there's all kinds of contaminants get into that flood water. Well, it settles inside the radio, and these people are selling this shit on eBay. They clean the outsides up really nice, man. They look nice until you take the covers off and you go, holy shit. And I'm here to tell you right now, if you get a flood radio, it's parts. And even using it as a parts chassis, there's not a lot you can use a lot of times. All of those trimmer resistors are going to be bad. Trimmer capacitors are going to be bad. Relays are going to be bad. Transformers are going to be shot. IF transformers are going to be shot. Anything that is not 100% completely environmentally sealed, it's trash. Throw it out the door. So, semiconductors, bridge rectifiers, the transistors, stuff like that will be fine. Crystal filters, as long as they're sealed, it might still be fine. But other things, anything that water can get into, write it off. It's a total loss. You will bankrupt yourself trying to rebuild a flood-damaged radio, so just be aware of that. Now, this one was not flood-damaged, other than the flood of somebody accidentally probably spilling something and liquid getting in this corner right here. But that's just something to be aware of. Like I say, we have all this bad weather. I mean, you look at just here last week, the last 2 weeks, between the hurricane and then the initial floods from the rainfall, and then that receded, and then a lot of riverbanks burst, a week later, several days to a week later. I think, a buddy, the radio shop here on YouTube, how all the floods in his area in North Carolina. But definitely something to keep an eye out for, because I see so much more. Matter of fact, I think it was last week on eBay, there was somebody, now they weren't trying to be sneaky about it. They didn't clean the outside of the radio. It was obvious. Just looking at it from the outside, there was no ifs, ands, or buts in my mind. They were in a flood. They didn't try to hide it. But like I say, I've seen a lot of radios that looked nice from the outside, and I took the covers off, and just horrible on the inside. So it's obvious somebody tried to clean them up, and they did not disclose that it had been in a flood. Now, unfortunately, unlike cars where it's illegal to sell a car without disclosing that it's been in a flood. Radios, hey man, you're on your own. There's no federal regulation on that, so it's just something to be aware of and to keep an eye out for, because you might get some good parts off of it, but it's not going to be a lot. Because, like I say, and trying to fix them, you'll bankrupt yourself. And even if you repair it and get it working fine, like all these IF transformers, I've seen that happen. You'll recap the radio, fix any problems that it has, it'll be working great. A month later, you have a problem. Send it back to your radio tech, IF transformer's bad. He puts another one in, sends it back to you. 4 months later, radio stops working. You send it back to him, another IF transformer's bad. And you'll just play that for the rest of your life. Because especially if it was in salt, that salt has gotten in there, and any moisture, salt is just like a sponge. It absorbs water, so it's always going to be drawing water into all those little IF transformers. And just over time, they're, the wires in most of these small IF transformers, unlike a normal full-size transformer where the wire is fairly substantial. It's something like this. The wires that are used, if you've ever had one of these IF transformers apart, it can be almost microscopic. It's so thin in some cases. I mean, it's, several times smaller than the diameter of a human hair. Really, really thin. And it doesn't take much. The tiniest bit of corrosion happens in one of those things. So just be aware of that. This one, like I say, just appeared to be a little bit of dampness. Water damage here, and then whatever happened to this pot over here. And it could have been that water got in here and just the moisture being inside the radio eventually affected that bias pot. But so there's another thing. Other than relays, things to keep an eye out for that can go bad. Anything mechanical, and these trimmer resistors are mechanical. So another one of those little things to keep an eye out for.